بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on Nur al-Idah, we've been looking at the Ahkam al-Janaiz, the rulings related to funerary practices and the and related matters. Now, before we start reading the text, there's a few rulings that Imam Ala-ud-Din Abidin mentions related to the deceased that are worthy of note. The first is that he says, تكره الضيافة من أهل الميت. It is makruh. It is makruh tahriman, right? To have the immediate family of the deceased serve food for visitors, right? And this is min al-bid'ah. It's a bid'ah, and it's a bid'ah munkara, right? The Prophet ﷺ said when Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib passed away, he said, "Isna'u li'ali Ja'far ta'ama, فَإِنَّهُ قَدْ جَاءَهُمْ مَا يُشْغِلُهُم." Prepare for the family of Ja'far food, for there has come to them that which is busying them. Right? And there are many mafasid in this. One is that when the person dies, their inheritance now belongs to their inheritors. It's not their money anymore. Some of the Salaf, if someone died, they would actually blow out the candles. Because even the candle... Just grab me a copy of Nur al-Idah. Pick one. All the property now belongs to the inheritors, right? And it's a priority to distribute it, right? The money, is the household money, etc., right? Now the family of the deceased, they have their own sorrow, and they have the responsibilities of the funerary practices, etc., to take care of. This is what is the responsibility. Like if there are people going to come, etc. One is you're not coming for entertainment, right? You come. So even if there's in the days after, which is properly after the burial, they're going to have, ta'ziyah, etc., etc. That's all properly after the burial. Then what you do, good choices. Then what you do is that's where the non-immediate family, where possible, they should step in, right? So let's say, Zubair's father passes away. So Zubair and his siblings, Zubair, Zubair or Zubair and his siblings, for them to prepare the food is makruh. It's a bid'ah. Right? And there's rather, this is where uncles and aunts and cousins and so on, they should step in. Right? This is from the responsibilities of family, right? Where possible. This is from the things for friends to be there, right? So let's say some random brother called Rehan, there's a convert friend of his, right? Who something happened, his wife passed away. Now people are going to go visit this brother. He's going to start serving food and this and that. No. So Rehan says, as his brother in Islam, he's my friend, I am going to step in and take care of these arrangements. And this is from husn al-ukhuwa, from the rights of companionship. from the rights of companionship. So this is right, and similarly, now this happens less. This happens less than it used to. And in general, it doesn't happen so much in the West. Well, partly because we just don't have enough Quran reciters, anyways. They used to hire people to recite Quran on behalf of the deceased, and charging merely for Quran recitation in the Hanafi school is not permissible. Right? And for those of you who have the Hadiyah al-Ala'iyah, the copy of Shaykh Muhammad Sa'id al-Burhani, Hafidahullah, Rahimahullah Ta'ala, is an excellent copy, and the footnotes are excellent. This is one of the places, however, where his footnote, disagreeing with the author of the Hadiyah al-Ala'iyah, and by implication, disagreeing with Ibn Abdin, the author is correct, not the footnote, right? Imam Ibn Abdin followed the position argued by great late scholars, including Imam al-Birgivi, that there's no basis in the Hanafi school for permitting for the charging for the mere recitation of the Quran. Teaching is a need, hiring imams is a need, right, etc. However, the mere recitation of the Quran is a purely devotional act. There's no there's no public need, right? So Rafi is busy, someone he knows passes away, so instead of reciting the Quran for him, he says, hire someone to recite the Quran on my behalf. This is, does not have basis. Against the Hanafi school, the only permission given for acts of worship, right, was when there's a public need for that, right? Charging to teach the religion, etc. Why? Because there's a need. Otherwise, people would not be able to dedicate themselves. And even there's better ways to handle it, etc. But that's it. That's done out of need. In the Hanafi school, charging for mere recitation of the Quran is not permitted, and it's a mafsada. It causes people to be lax. Rehan becomes a wealthy businessman. Someone passed away in his family. Instead of him reciting Quran, his family members say, look, we'll just hire the students at the madrasa. Get 40 of them, do 10 khatams of Quran. What did you recite? Oh, we paid them for it. So here, Shaykh Muhammad Sa'id al-Burhani presents a counter argument in the footnote. It's not acceptable. And for those who are interested, if you look in Imam al-Atasi's Sharh, and this is where cross-referencing books is very beneficial. Imam Khalid al-Atasi, in his Sharh on the Majalla, and you can find the place, volume 2, page 670 and 671, and that's in commercial law, but the issue comes up there. So he confirms the fact that what Ibn Abdin chose was the correct opinion in the Hanafi school. Because after Ibn Abdin, it's pretty hard, because in Damascus, it was quite a widespread practice. So a mufti of Damascus who came after Ibn Abdin tried to argue that you can charge for Quran recitation. For just Quran recitation. Someone dies, you hire some Quran reciters to recite Quran all day, that there's leeway in this. So Alam al-Hamzawi argued in one of his Rasail against Ibn Abdin, but the whole argument that he made was already addressed by Ibn Abdin. So Alam al-Atasi, and you can just put the one day if you have the book you can find it, in his Sharh al-Majalla, volume 2, page 670 and 671. Volume 2, page 670 and 61. Sharh of al-Atasi on the Majalla. He حقق أن الصحيح ما جرى عليه خاتمة المحققين, that what Ibn Abdin chose and chosen by his son, that you cannot charge for mere recitation of the Quran. Right? You can find that discussion there. Al-Birgivi wrote multiple treatises attacking this, as being deeply detrimental. Because then you just outsource religious duties, right? No, qira'at competitions, no, no, prizes for the purpose of encouragement is fine. But if it starts becoming like, people, so in the food world now, there's, some people are no longer cook. They just participate in regional and international competitions, like barbecue competitions that have become a big practice. I was reading a management article about this, like the economics of celebrity chefs or something, right? Some people neither run a restaurant nor do they work for somebody. They just participate in celebrity competition. So there's some people, and there's some parts of the Muslim world where you have that, right? Right? So people just go from Quran contest to Quran contest and they earn prizes and this, that. And there's a mafsada diniya in this. Why? Because the Quran is not for play and similarly, it's not a good habit. Like the idea of the celebrity qari, in that sense, is not a good habit, right? So you have a tour of Canada with a qari. They say yujtanab. Things like that should be avoided because the Quran is not like an entertainment piece, right? It's a book of guidance, etc. And now, there's difference of opinion on it. We can't condemn those things, but practically, they're not good habits. And the ulama do not approve. And the great scholars of Quran don't approve of this. So one of the greatest living scholars, Shaykh Ayman Suwaid, Hafidhullah, talks about even reciting, gathering to recite the Quran in beautiful tones, like just reciting the qira'at, whatever. Especially if it becomes widespread. That's not the purpose of the Quran. Okay? Beautiful recitation is, right? But the context here being the hiring someone to recite Quran for the deceased is not. Rather, the gathering to recite the Quran for the deceased is praiseworthy, but the people who choose to gather do so and they willingly donate the reward. Right? And what's being donated is the sincerity and the effort, not the quantity. Right? And then another just point related to the deceased, Ibn Ala-Din Abdin mentions that ta'ziyah, so expressing your condolences to the deceased, is disliked after 3 days. Except for someone who is away. Right? أَوْ لِمَنْ لَمْ يَدْرِ, or someone who doesn't know. Right? So in general, there are some hadith about not making ta'ziyah beyond 3 days. But the fuqaha made exceptions. Which is, except for someone who is away. Right? Or someone who didn't know. Right? Because let's say, someone, so a distant friend of Sister Sadia, she, her mother died. You find out 15 days later, so you express your condolences. Some people say, no, you can't express condolences, 3 days have passed. Like, you feel foolish because you're just like, So that ruling is conditioned by what? By someone who was absent or someone who didn't know, right? Or for someone who it was difficult, if you think of the GTA, Sidi Rafi finds out someone, someone passed away on a Monday morning, and they janazah on Monday, and they live on the far east end. During the week, he wasn't able to go there, so he goes on Saturday to express his condolences. That's fine, but the formal condolences should not last beyond the 3 days, right? The formal condolence, 3 days of visitation, that's formally. But people find out after, they go express their condolences, nothing wrong with that. Right? But the formal, like days of ta'ziyah should not go beyond 3, broadly. Right? 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 And it's from the sunnah to make dua for the dua to the living for the deceased. Right? And there's several du'as that have been related from the Prophet ﷺ. Imam al-Nawawi in his Adhkar, the beautiful section, what do you say when visiting someone dying? What do you du'as for the deceased, and what do you say to the family of the deceased? Right? And it's one of the things that should be anything that happens in your life, like should keep Kitab al-Adhkar handy, because always things of the Prophet ﷺ. And it's good to like put little indexes, whatever, of useful du'as and so on as well. Bismillah. Okay. So where exactly did we stop? Right? So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We looked at the ghusl, right? And so he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَالْمَرْأَةُ تُغَسِّلُ زَوْجَهَا. A woman may wash her husband. Right? A woman may wash her husband. Right? Because what happens? Upon death, what happens? What is marriage? Marriage is a contract. Right? It has spiritual implications in the hereafter, but your contracts, when do they end? Death affects contracts in general. Right? Now, how does death affect contracts? Depending on the type of contract. Right? Like, if you bought something on installments and then you die, can you continue paying the installments? No, because you're dead. Okay? So, and even legally, there's arrangements. Right? If you die, what happens to your installment payments, and what happens to the item? Right? Because the other party has a right to either be paid those installments. If they cannot be paid, someone else to pay for them. Otherwise, for that item to be reappropriated so they can recover what they can of. Right? So there's implications of death to contracts. Because the dead party cannot fulfill their end of the contract. Because they're dead. It's a bit of a. Right? So, likewise, marriage is a contract. Now, what's the difference between a man dying and the woman being alive, and the woman dying and the man being alive?
The woman is in Idah for.
Yeah. Right? If the man dies, there's still a marital connection that remains upon death, which is the Iddah period. Right? So during the Iddah period, a marital connection remains between the husband and the wife, which is the Iddah. Right? The Iddah for the one whose husband has died is Quranic. How long is it?
If it's a widow?
Yeah.
4 months, 4 lunar months.
Yeah. Right. أربعة أشهر وعشرة. Right? In the Quran, the 4 months and 10 days. So that connection remains. So that's the difference. Husband dies. In both cases, the marriage contract ends with death. Because if it didn't, neither party could remarry. Right? So marriage is a contract. contract ends. With respect to the husband now, men don't have a iddah. Because men don't get pregnant. Right? Practical. And this is the divine wisdom. There's wisdom in it, but the ruling is men do not have a iddah, women do. Now, because that connection remains, therefore, the rulings of iddah apply. So she can touch him, she can look at him, because, however, there's an exception. What's the exception?
If she gives birth?
Yep. حتى تضع حملها, right? If she gives birth. No, so let's say, yeah. So let's just say he was driving her to the hospital, right? Because her contractions had started. And he was so excited, he was looking at her, consoling her. And he crossed the red light, and a car plowed into him. He died. The woman rolled out of the car, and she gave birth on the street. Can she now bury him? Rahmatullahi alayhi and so on, everything, right? Now can she wash him? No, because after his death, let's say he died and she gave birth after him. But these are kind of situations where, all joking aside, right? What if the baby was born before the father died? It makes a difference. Which is where you need to know definitions of things. That's where the precision of one's fiqh is tested. And the difference between someone who knows and doesn't is, in these exceptional cases, you have the principles. They say dabtul masail. You know the things. Okay, iddah starts, when this happens, ghusl would be permitted for her. If this happened, all the different issues are there, so you can apply multiple considerations to a case. Practically, until you've been thoroughly tested, you always need to confirm. And don't give while you have teachers alive, never give, the first time you're going to apply your understanding to an issue, double check with them. Double check with them. No, never, otherwise you'll say absurd things. It's like a family died in Amman. Shaykh Amjad's a faqih, right, in the Shafi'i school. But there's an exceptional situation where this person died in Kharabsha, this family, but it was right around New Year's Eve. And that winter was very cold, so the ground was frozen. And the graveyard's in a place that's full of stones. So they weren't able to dig more than 3 or 4 feet, not very much. Right? There's a minimum depth, etc. So Shaykh Amjad found in the Shafi'i school there is leeway in that. Right? And there's 3 people who made in charge of taking care of funerary proceeding. They're all ulama. Shaykh Amjad, Shaykh Ahmad Snobar, Shaykh Iyad al-Ghawj. Shaykh Amjad came out and said, Khalas, I'm an angel. He came out from the meeting with Shaykh Noor. Said, I'm Munkar and he's Nakir. And Shaykh Iyad said, you're Nakir. Because Nakir means, Khalas. So I'm an angel. I'll anoint all of you. He said, what's going on? He said, we're taking care of the funerals. Khalas. But this issue came up, said, well, according to the books, there's a minimum depth, unless you can't dig further, because there'd be, some places water level is high, so if you go below, you'll be burying people in water, which happens in Canada as well, or the ground's too hard, etc. But he never applied that ruling directly. So he called Shaykh Nuh Ali Salman and confirmed with him before saying, okay, this is what we'll act upon. Right? Because one thing is to know the fiqh, but fatwa needs practice in applying the theory The theoretical conclusions to practical circumstances. And and sometimes the practical circumstance may affect the conclusion itself. Right? In terms of making it easier or making it harder. Right? Okay. So that's why the woman can wash her husband, in brief. But بخلافه, but the husband cannot wash the woman. كأم الولد, right? Like the الولد, with the slave girl who gave birth to her master's son, right? لا يغسل سيدها, لا تغسل سيدها. Right? The الولد, it's a particular category of slave, a slave woman who gave birth to her master's son, or to her master's child. You know, she would not wash her master in that case, because she would not be she's not legally his wife, right? And there's implications in that, because then she doesn't have iddah. وَلَوْ مَاتَتْ. Now, if there's no one else to wash him, then she would make tayammum over him with a piece of cloth. Right? وَلَوْ مَاتَتْ امْرَأَةٌ مَعَ الرِّجَالِ يَمَّمُوهَا كَعَكْسِهِ. If a woman dies amongst men who are not her, who are not of the family members who could potentially wash her, then they would make tayammum on her, with her remaining covered and with them covering their hands, right? كَعَكْسِهِ. Or if a man dies amongst women, right? Right? بِخِرْقَةٍ. Make tayammum with a cloth, right? So they would wrap cloth around their hands, so there's no direct contact, and they should be not light cloth, like heavily bandaged, heavily clothed, right? And they would, they would not look at the private. They would, like from under a cloth, they just rub the area, right? Right, out of necessity, because there's several conflicting, right? There's the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala there, but there's also the right of the person to be washed, right? وكذا الخنثى المشكل ييمم في ظاهر الرواية. The hermaphrodite, someone of uncertain gender, right? Now, if someone's of uncertain gender, the khuntha, right? Then you have the khuntha. One is someone who feels that so someone is of the gender of their functional sexual organs, right? So someone feels like a woman, but they have male sexual organs. They are considered to be a man. So that's someone who feels that they're khuntha, that they feel, they're someone who is that they just feel between being man and woman, or a man who feels like a woman, or a woman who feels like man. So this would be considered the category of being khuntha. If they just feel in a certain way, then you are the sex of your organs in that sense, right? Right? And then how you feel about it, that's something that would require treatment, like counseling, etc. Right? In the general case. Now, in the extreme case, would sex change be permitted? That's most of the fuqaha have said no. There are fuqaha have said to the contrary. That's a separate matter. Now, what happens if someone does undertake a sex change? That's another investigation. But someone just feels that way. Then you have the khuntha, right? Someone who has both male and female sexual organs, right? Then which one is functional, right? So there's a khuntha, someone who there's a khuntha tawahuman, someone who feels between male and female. Then that goes back to their physical, what organs they have. If someone is a khuntha who has both private parts, then the one that is functional, right? And sorry for being explicit about it, but say, where does the urine come out from? Right? And in that case, they are the gender of their functional organs. Even if that is not the case, right? That's someone who does have both male and female, and it's not about features, right? Ultimately, it's about sexual organs, of outward sexual organs. Then the khuntha al-mushkil is where even that is not clear. Now that would be exceedingly, exceedingly rare. Right? Why? Because in classification, anyone you can consider male or female, it avoids, we're very much a try to be binary religion. Okay? Right? Whoever can be considered male is considered male, whoever can be considered female is considered female. And there's an objective criterion for that. But there are cases where they're mushkil, يعني ما فيه إشكال يرجح in أمكن. Anywhere that where there's uncertainty, one needs to make a choice and is made through an objective criterion, which is their physical organs. Again, same basis. Then there will be a small subset with the al-khuntha al-mushkil, which is the khuntha, who even after that, we can't. They're treated bil-ihtiyat, right? With caution. So in each set of rulings, they're treated with what is more cautious with respect to them. And that's outside the scope over here, but the khuntha al-mushkil, tayammum is done. Because men exercise caution that it could be a woman, women exercise caution, it could be a man, so you make tayammum. Right? وَإِنْ وُجِدَ ذُو رَحِمٍ مَحْرَمٍ يُمِّمَ بِلَا خِرْقَةٍ. Yeah. So if a mahram is found of the opposite sex, then tayammum is done, but a cloth is not required, right? Because even then the issue, if you're washing them, right, then there'd be levels of exposure that would not be dignified. نسأل الله العافية. ويجوز للرجل والمرأة تغسيل صبي أو صبية لم يشتهيا. It is permitted for a man or a woman to wash a male or female child who did not reach the age of potential desirability. And ishtiha is not desirable, meaning that people would normally desire them. Right? But beyond a certain age, someone has begun to acquire the features of adulthood. Right? So at least some people may begin to desire them. Right? And this is a reality that they are, and that's why there's a whole category of pornography, etc., related to that thing, because there are some people in society who would desire them. And there's a practical caution related to children at that age. Right? Of just, and partly for them, they're instilled dignity in dress and so on. And there is then a restraint, a gradually increasing restraint in their dress and so on, for practical wisdom, because these are realities that there's people who have your lack of restraint with respect to this matter. Then he says, rahimahullah, وَلَا بَأْسَ بِتَقْبِيلِ الْمَيِّتِ. There's nothing wrong with kissing the dead. And we saw the athar of Sayyidina, the hadith of Sayyidina Abu Bakr doing that, right? And unless there is anything beyond that, right? It's done, right, as a qublatu mahabba, a kissing out of love, right? Right? As long as it's not done beyond that, right? While, go ahead.
Does this apply for a man kissing his wife as their marriage is over now?
Yeah. Right, so this is, in the situations where direct contact will be permitted. This is where it's good to know the Shafi'i opinion, right? Because you don't make things difficult. Someone wants to stick to the Hanafi school. This is what they do. Just to kiss her on top of her head, whatever. Someone wants to kiss her forehead. If they do, it's good to know situations where there is khilaf and there isn't, right? And that's where people who deal with these kinds of things, they're aware. And there's also some situations where you don't over-specify. You tell them the ruling and let them apply it, right? Because the bigger scheme of things, there's things that are clearly harmful and clearly less harmful, and there's other things that are ahkam ta'abbudiyya, right? They're done out of ta'abbud to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And especially when the harm is not manifest, etc. That's really their personal moral choice. You don't, at these kind of situations, the Mashaykh said, don't over-specify, especially in matters where there's khilaf. So someone were like a, educated, learned Hanafi, they already know what to do. If they don't already know, then these kinds of sensitive moments are not the time to teach a Hanafi to be more Hanafi, right? So that's where when there's khilaf, you kind of, if they ask you, can I? Then that's why I say talk to, right? Like there's people who are experienced in these kind of things. Like how do you handle those sensitive situations, right?
What's the shot you're with?
Good question. You live in a neighborhood with enough Shafi'is. And then he says, وَعَلَى الرَّجُلِ تَجْهِيزُ امْرَأَتِهِ. The husband is responsible for the funerary preparations for the wife, right? And right? Now there's two opinions in the Hanafi school, right? The position taken right? Here is that it is unconditionally, there's two opinions. One is the husband is unconditionally responsible for the funerary duties of the wife. So you can diagram this, right? That the wife could be in two states, usr or yusr, in financial difficulty or in financial ease. Meaning, in the case here, was she on her own financially able to cover her funerary costs at the point of death? Or usr, or financially unable, right? Without difficulty. And is he financially able or unable? So there's four possibilities. You could diagram it. So Imam Ash-Shrumbulali says, if we read the matn first, وَعَلَى الرَّجُلِ تَجْهِيزُ امْرَأَتِهِ وَلَوْ مُعْسِرًا فِي الْأَصَحِ. Right? So the matn would indicate what? It is upon the husband to do the funerary preparations for his wife, even if he's in financial hardship. So whether she is able or not, and even if he is able or not without hardship, in each case he has to take care of her funeral practice, right? So in all the various cases. Imam Shumbulani in his commentary conditions this, right? Right? How does he condition it? And the funerary practice is the kafan and the dafn. Right? The shrouding and the burial costs. Right? According to Imam, so in the matan he leaves it unconditional. And he's probably critiqued for this. So he conditioned it in his commentary by saying what? لو معسرة, if she was not financially able. Because it's obligatory. Ala, it's obligatory for him. What if she had the money? So according to the matan, it would indicate that it's part of the husband's responsibility to provide. Has to provide for that. So the matan, however, the commentary, however, conditions it that according to Abu Yusuf, this is if the wife is mu'sira, if the wife was financially unable, she could have yusr or usr. She could be financially able to afford the without hardship the funerary costs or not. And he gives his references. Even if he is in hardship and she has ease. وَهُوَ الْأَصَحْ. Right? And this other opinion that regardless of whether she is in financial, in usr or yusr, he has to provide for the funerary costs even if he had financial hardship. Right? 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 And according to Muhammad al-Hasan, the marriage is over, so the financial responsibilities that arise after the marriage are not his responsibility. Because this is all in terms of setting the minimal limit. No one would deny that it's the good thing to do, the right thing. Not his obligation. Zubayr and Zubaydah got married. She was terrible to him. She was cursing him out, etc. She walked out of the house and she got run over by a car. Yes. وَصَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَى سَيِّدِنَا مُحَمَّدٍ وَعَلَى آلِهِ وَصَحْبِهِ وَسَلَّمَ. I'm not responsible, right? Now that's not good. From the door of virtue, say you should do it. But what if? But where does this is where fiqh is. Like if someone came to you and they asked you, do I have to pay for her funeral costs? Sometimes you can get away with giving advice. But al-mustasharu mu'taman, the one who's consulted, has been trusted. They want to know what the hukm of Allah is regarding this matter. And they've sought you out as a Hanafi. That they know you're a Hanafi, right? For you to say no, you have to pay when the fatwa is that you don't, that is a type of cheating, because you don't know their circumstance. Right? Firstly, if that is right, now you could advise them, etc. So sometimes you can get away with that. I'd advise you. Just pay up, it's not that difficult. Maybe just borrow some money from somebody, right? Keep it simple, right? But they insist, I want to know the ruling. Then it is not halal for you to answer from other than the fatwa position in the school, or at least a sound opinion, right? But in those situations, if you're unable to, etc., especially when you have people who are clearly superior to say, go ask so-and-so. You're allowed to deflect. But there's people alive who cannot do that. But even the senior-most scholar, Shaykh Adib, would often deflect questions to someone 4 years his junior in age, Shaykh Abdul Razak al-Halabi. So, Wallah, تعرف الشيخ عبد الرزاق؟ زلمة كبير في السن. This guy who's really old كذا بيجلس في الأموي. Like some people like speak at their level. بيجلس في الأموي كذا والله مليان علم. He's full of knowledge. Like it's like tell him this. والله شغلة كبيرة. Like it's a big deal. Right? All these stuff. والله يعني مليان علم. He's full of knowledge. Right? Go ask him. Right? Go ask him. نسأل الله العافية. So what's the fatwa position? According to Maraq al-Falah, the husband has to provide for the, for the wife's funerary expenses, even if she was wealthy and he was poor, right? Wallahu a'lam. We can, Omar, just double check in the hadiyah. What does he say? Okay. Okay. ومن لا مال له فكفنه على من تلزمه نفقته. Whoever doesn't have wealth of their own for the funerary expenses, then their shrouding is the responsibility of those obligated to provide for them. So an adult son died, they didn't have wealth. So a poor adult son, if the parents were able, they would still be responsible for him. So the parents would be obligated, even in the case of the son, right? Etc. Right? وإن لم يوجد من تجب عليه نفقته ففي بيت المال. And there's no one of the immediate family who would be obligated to provide. So immediately would be, the father, if the son is available, then the son, etc. Then, there's a fiqh of nafaqah, of who's responsible for providing in the immediate family. If none of them are available, then it goes to the Bayt al-Mal, the funerary, the Muslim treasury, right? And this is one of the things that every community, right, in a non-Muslim land, it's a communal obligation that each community have the allocated discretionary funds that, because min furud al-kifaya, we're obligated to bury the dead, and it's the right of the dead that we buried without undue delay. So that's there's many types of fundraising that are obligatory. Those things should be a fund for that. After a while, someone, a masjid that provides funerary service, they know how many people die each year whose expenses need to be covered. That much money needs to be raised sufficiently in advance so that, let's say if a family died in a car crash, happens, we have the costs to do that without undue delay, right? And it's not, and you see in the Sunnah, it's not good to always raise funds in an emergency way. It's very clear from the Sunnah that al-isti'dad لجلب الخير ودفع الشر من السنة. Being prepared to be able to do the good and to avoid the harm is from the Sunnah, both ways, right? So not everything needs a launch good campaign. Someone died, there's no funeral expenses, right? Because then it's only if you can make a good case for it, or if you are connected with people who are connected. And every Muslim has a right to this. من بيت المال. فإن لم يعطى, but what if they're not given? Right? عجزا أو ظلما, whether because of incapacity, the public funds are dry, incapacity, or ظلما, or wrongly. They said you didn't fill out the funerary documents. Right? And that's one of the bad things that many Muslim charities and many Muslim organizations fall into, that while due diligence is important for any charity, right, that's caution. But when it comes to charity, compassion trumps caution. Right? Compassion. It's better to give to 10 undeserving people than to turn away one deserving person. Right? And that's another of the things that those who are involved in communities, sometimes we take, and actually it's a big debate in the broader society. So what they take, they'll take, okay, financial verification forms. And I know multiple cases of people who have, for example, they have disabilities, they have trauma, or they're recent immigrants, or not so recent immigrants, but their English is not good. In a situation of shock, sometimes it can be difficult to fill out documentation, etc. So just give them 13 pages of documents, fill this out, and we'll process, the burial expenses for your family. Especially when a case is undeniable, right? It's like someone's homeless, right? So okay, please fill this out, then we will give you assistance. Someone's homeless, like who would be claiming like they're living on the street? So you have compassion with caution, right? But it's facilitative caution, right? Not preventative caution, right? And that's a big, big fitna that a lot of Muslim organizations fall into, right? I know people who are in difficulties, they don't give. And at the same time, these masajid and the institutions, sometimes will be sitting on tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars that are undistributed. Why? Because they've made it so difficult to ask for the money. Right? So, we need to step up to take care of many of these needs. Right? So in that case, so if the public funds, and this would apply to the Bayt al-Mal, but also apply to the Muslim organizations, right? Because they're entrusted with public funds. The public funds of a Muslim organization do not belong to the organization, and they do not belong to the people running them. They belong to the public. They are umana. They are trustees of public funds. So they have to use them with practical caution. Right? So then, فَعَلَى النَّاسِ, then it is upon the people. It becomes a distributed collective obligation. وَيَسْأَلُ لَهُ التَّجْهِيزَ مَنْ لَا يَقْدِرُ عَلَيْهِ غَيْرَهُ. Then, it's a collective obligation. So let's say, a young brother named Hamza Ali. He doesn't have any money, but he finds out there's someone dead and they don't have funeral or anything. So they would be obligated, if they can't do it, it becomes their moral obligation to ask other people. And يسأل غيره. Ready? التجهيز من لا يقدر عليه يسأل غيره. And there's some fiqh related. Now, interestingly, there's an issue. Now, so let's say they come to Sidi Hamza. Sidi Hamza gives 3 Yemeni shawls to bury this dead person, right? Who do those shawls legally belong to? Because can a dead person own anything? Right? So let's say that they buried him wrong. So a bunch of fiqh students buried this guy who died. They buried him wrong. Right? They thought it said 6 feet. They misinterpreted what feet was. Because they thought it was feet sideways. So instead of 6 feet being 72 inches, like 6 feet this way would be 30 inches. Right? So they buried him in like something. So some wolves ate the dead person. And they dug up the body, ate the dead person. So Sidi Hamza runs into his shawls. Who do the shawls belong to? The ownership of the shrouding remains with the person who shrouded them. But that's an irrevocable permission, right? While the dead body is still buried, you cannot take away the shrouding. But it legally belongs to you in that sense. Yeah, and there's some detail. It's a highly unlikely thing. But sometimes they mention these things just for the application of legal understanding. Right? That how do you own something? Right? There's ownership. Who can own? A living person can own something. Right? So let's say, Rehan becomes this wealthy businessman. So I want to buy that house. So you can't. Why? It's owned by a dead person. Stop. Can a dead person own a house? No. It goes to the inheritor. There's no inheritors, and there's secondary consequences. Yeah, but it's yours. Yeah. But then it's not inherited. No, because it's an irrevocable permission. If you're shrouded in, that's part of the rights of the dead. The ones that are shrouded in, you can't take off the shroud. Sorry, what's the question?
Sorry. With regards to ownership of the shroud, when it is given, it's meant to be shrouded, so the family couldn't replace the shroud with another shroud.
No, but who is the shroud given to?
If it's given to the dead person.
No, the dead person can't receive anything.
So that irrevocable permission.
No, but depends when it was given and to whom it was given. It's given to the living person. So someone comes up to me and said, Sidi, here's your shroud. I accept it. Then it's my choice whether I want to be shrouded in that or not. Right? Because Sidi Rafi gifted me some shrouds. So these are really blessed shrouds, I said, Jazakallah khair. What a wonderful gift. But let's say that happened. Just because he gifted me a shroud doesn't mean I have to be shrouded in it. So it's a matter of ownership. Right? But let's say I gift, and it gets messy. The reason this is mentioned is because in issues like this, it does get messy. A recent prominent person passed away. Multiple people gave shrouds to the family, and they gave it. Who did you give it to? Once a person's dead, you didn't give it to the dead person because they can't accept anything, right? So, a giving. That's why the rest of the chapters of fiqh are important. A gift requires someone to accept it. There has to be a transfer of ownership. Who accepted the gift? Was it the guardian? Right? Was it the guardian? But they accepted the gift. But then it's their discretion whether they want the person to be buried in it or not. They accepted the gift. Now, if it wasn't, it would be probably better for them just to give it back. But the ownership has to be clear. Right? Or was it given? Right? So, let's say someone said, I have this cloth. I'd like so-and-so to be buried in it. Was that given to somebody? Was there a transfer of ownership? The default is that the item belongs still to the person. They asked the guardian to bury them in this. The basis is that the ownership remains with the person who owned it originally, unless there's a clear transfer of ownership. But those are matters that arise in the fiqh of commercial transactions, would have implications here. Okay. Now let's stay focused. Now, there's 3 levels of kafan. The kafan that is sunnah, then when there's need, and then there's necessity. Right? And if one can't do the sunnah fully, then to the extent that one can. Right? So, وَكَفَنُ الرَّجُلِ سُنَّةً قَمِيصٌ وَإِزَارٌ وَلِفَافًا. مما كان يلبسه في حياته. Right? The kafan, the sunnah shrouding, is with 3 pieces of cloth. Right? Qamis, right? Which is the upper garment, which is the upper shrouding. Qamis here refers to literally is a shirt, it's an upper shrouding. The legal definition here of a qamis is from the neck to the feet. Right? Qamis. Right? Without sleeves, because they don't need sleeves when they're dead. Right? What the second is izar, which is the lower shrouding. But this lower shrouding is min al-qarni ila al-qadam. This shrouds completely. Right? And then lifafa. Right? And then a wraparound, which would go beyond the head a little bit and beyond the feet a little bit. So one thing that can wrap around once, that would be considered the qamis till the neck. Second one would be wrapping the whole body, including the head. And the third wrap would be like candy, you have the ends, right? So you can tie it up, right? Not like the candy, but the believer is sweeter than candy, right? In that sense, like they have because you need something at the end to tie them up, right? So, from what the person used to normally wear. Now the complication is a lot of our dress is not necessarily very conducive to this, right? Especially with the practicalities coming to, right, with shirts and trousers and this and that, it would be complicating in terms of the funerary practices. Some people say, and cloth is no longer that expensive, right? To get 3 pieces of cloth for the person to be wrapped around it's not a major expense. But if there was a need, like someone has a thobe, for example, so so we can take their lungi, their izar, and wrap it around once. We can take something else that, or even clothe them in it, etc. It can be multiple items of clothing, so they can be fully dressed. That would be fine. The only problem is then, there's no problem. If their clothing is sufficient, then that's fine. If one uses other clothing, there's nothing wrong with it, right? And it's from the sunnah to make without any waste of money and without any extravagance and without any takalluf. These are 3 covered. Without waste of money, without extravagance, and without takalluf, without going out of one's way. Then, to give a dignified kafan is from the sunnah, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا كَفَّنَ أَحَدُكُمْ أَخَاهُ فَلْيُحْسِنْ كَفَنَهُ. If any of you shrouds their brother, then do so with excellence. The hadith is in Sahih Muslim, right? It's there. Right? And the Prophet said, لا تغالوا في الكفن. Right? So anyone's having any hardship, etc., just get them kafan cloth. Right? And some of these things, the muhsineen, like some of these collective responsibilities, you want to gain some great reward. These are some of the things to consider. Like, for example, some of these furudul kifaya, right? That, okay, how are the funerary costs in the community, right? Whether you get the cloth themselves or the people responsible, you put some money. How much could funerary, like the shrouding cloth cost? It's not very much. So you make a contribution to that, right? And you have the reward of shrouding someone who passed away, right? And one of the sunnahs, that's why all these abwab of khair, one should aspire to fill as many of the abwab al-khair as one can, the doors of good. Because as we know, وَاللَّهُ فِي عَوْنِ الْعَبْدِ مَا دَامَ الْعَبْدُ فِي عَوْنِ أَخِيهِ. Allah is in the aid of a servant as long as the servant is in the aid of others. Right? Right? That, and they say, بِمَا دِنْتَ تُدَانَ. as you are to others, so shall you find yourself, right? So this is min asbab husn al-khatima, for oneself and for others, to assist people in these critical things, help with some of the funerary practices, etc. These are areas of, and certainly far better than buying a $500,000 chandelier for some masjid. Because it's not a very glamorous thing to do to help someone get buried, right? But those are great things. So let's say some poor family comes, it's quite expensive to bury somebody. Yeah, converts, etc. Someone dies, right? Right? It's thousands of dollars to get someone buried. Right? But those are good places to, one should aspire, make an intention at least to have one person whose funerary expenses one takes, one helps at some point in one's life, right? Okay. وَكِفَايَةً إِزَارٌ وَلِفَافٌ. So ideally 3 wraparounds. Qamis, which goes from neck down or more, but minimally from neck to feet. Then you have izar, and izar here is not the bottom, the lower garment. Here izar is the second wraparound, but it's of the whole body, and the lifafa, which is like the candy wrapping, right? Goes beyond the feet. And if one can't, then what fulfills the basic dignified requirement is izar and lifafa, right? Which is one complete wraparound and then the candy wrapping, right? The second one, right? And then وَفُضِّلَ الْبَيَاضُ مِنَ الْقُطْنِ. And white cotton cloth has been preferred. It's not, it's afdal. It has been preferred because it has good meanings, right? Right. And then there's a hadith about it that's related from Imam Ahmad, from Abu Dawood and others, right? Right? That wear white because it's the best of your clothing, and shroud your dead in it, right? But without takalluf, right? And they say the basis of takfeen, of shrouding, goes back to Sayyidina Adam. Right? That Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, when he died, Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam came down, right? And Sayyidina Jibreel washed him. And he applied perfume to him, like hanut and so on. And he shrouded him and buried him. And then he told his children, that, هذه سنة موتاكم يا بني آدم. That this is the sunnah of your deceased, O children of Adam. And it's actually narrated by Imam al-Bayhaqi in the Sunan al-Kubra. Right? Allahu a'lam. وكل من الإزار واللفافة من القرن إلى القدم. And both the izar and the lifafa go from head to toe. Right? ولا يجعل لقميصه كم. And one does not make sleeves for their qamis. Literally their long shirt. Right? It's a shrouding. Right? ولا دخريص ولا جيب. Nor an opening, nor side pockets or side slits. Right? ولا تكف أطرافه. And one does not trim the edges. Right? And then he said, وتكره العمامة في الأصح. Dressing the deceased in a turban is disliked, according to the sounder opinion. It's not from the kafan of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? However, it is related from some of the companions, amongst them Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar, that they did this. So they said if it's done for the scholars, etc., of distinction, then there's no harm in it. Especially if it was from their own imama, right? Without takalluf. Some would put the turban of the scholar on top of their funerary practice. But those are customs, right? Because like they would walk the deceased through the town. So if it's a alim or something, they'd put their turban on top of the janazah, so people would know that this is the janazah of an alim, so they'd be more inclined to walk behind it, for example. No harm in that. But it's not intrinsically sunnah. There's no merit that, well, you want to be buried in the best way. You'll be resurrected how you were. So if someone is following the sunnah of the imam in their life, they'll be resurrected with that then. Doing a last minute add-on is not of, So, and then وَلُفَّ مِنْ يَسَارِهِ ثُمَّ يَمِينِهِ. They're wrapped from their left and then from their right. Right? So that the right side be above. Right? So they're wrapped, left to right and then right to left. So the right wrapping is above. Right? So the first cloth, right? Like imagine you have a cloth. So the left cloth covers this way first and then right on top of it, right? Yeah, so the arms are inside. So imagine if this is can I just borrow your shawl? I promise not to take it into my grave. Right? So, I mean, of course, imagine, can I unfold it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, it's pretty big. Wow. Yeah. No, so, right? So, right? So, for example, this cloth, you would take this part, right? This goes inside this way, from left to right, and then right to left. Right? Right? For example, there's other possibilities, right? But it's done in this way so that the right side is above. Right? Right? So you tuck the left in. It's also secure. Right? You tuck the left in, and then you cover the right. So the right side is above. And this applies to all three. Okay. Right. وَعُقِدَ إِنْ خِيفَ انْتِشَارُهُ. And it's tied if one fears that it'll become unwrapped. That's a practical matter, right? It's not intrinsically praiseworthy or not to tie it. But when one ties it, one does not stitch it, right? One just, makes a knot, etc., just so that it stays in place. Now, what about the woman's shroud? وتزاد في المرأة وتزاد المرأة في السنة خمارا لوجهها. Right, so there's the 3 plus a khimar, something that comes down over her face, right? And the khimar there, comes down from above her face, right? And khammara is to cover over something, right? 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 So, and these are two things in the Quran when it comes to the hijab. Two terms are used, right? Or one is the khimar, khumurihinna, right? And the other is jalabi bihinna and the jilbab, right? And each has a lexical meaning, right? That was known. Any? Now, the khimar is something that covers something completely. They say khamr covers the intellect, right? So juice, it becomes khamr because it's it's the qualities of the grape juice were completely covered over by the intoxicating qualities, right? Takhammara. So, and so there's implications there, right? And so those are two things, because sometimes people just ask, well, the hijab is not mentioned in the Quran. Well, the hijab is mentioned in the Quran in the context of a separation, min wara'i hijab, but that's not the context, right? The context is of, covering, and but that's a separate discussion. So here, right? So, خمارا لوجهها وخرقة لربط ثدييها, and a cloth around the chest area, again for the purpose of preserving dignity, right? And وفي الكفاية خمارا, right? So ideally, two extra shrouds are added, something that's draped above and something around the chest area, right? Kifayatan, one adds what? Khimaran, adds one cloth above her head that covers the chest area as well. وَيَجْعَلُ شَعْرُهَا ضَفِيرَتَيْن, and her hair is made into two non-decorative braids. ضَفِيرَتَيْن here, but they say one does not decorate them in any way, right? It's not the time for decoration, right? على صدرها, on her chest. فوق القميص ثم الخمار, above the first wrapping, then the khimar, then the covering from the face. فوقه تحت اللفافة, then the full wraparound. It just makes, so it keeps the face area, the other things more fully covered, right? Yes.
Could you go over the order for the women's shrouds?
Yeah. So you have فوق القميص, right? So there's a qamis, which is the under, the first wrapping, right? It goes from shoulders, right? So by definition, that's not yet covering the braids. So the braids are placed on top of it. Then you have the khimar. You have the khimar which comes over, from the head down, right, to the chest area. Then above that, you have khimaran fawqahu, and then above that you have the lifafa. Then you have the lifafa, right? ثم الخرقة فوقها, and then the khirqa, the cloth that wraps around the chest area on top of that, right? وتجمر الأكفان, one uses one uses incense, right? To perfume the kafan, right? And this is for men and women, right? This also keeps a negative, bad smell, etc. And it's it's pleasing to the angels. Witran qabla an yudraj fiha, so they should be perfumed with this before the person is entered into them, right? And this is from it's established in hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But it was from the funerary practices of some of the Christian sects that they would follow the deceased with incense. The Prophet ﷺ forbade that. لا تتبع الجنازة or لا تتبع الجنازة بصوت ولا نار. A funeral should not be followed by loud voices nor by fire. By fire because they would burn incense. Right? Although Shaykh Abdul Ghani Nabulsi argues, they say one doesn't raise one's voice in dhikr in following the funeral. Right? But Shaykh Abdul Ghani and Nabulsi argued that so much worldly talk has spread. Like people, when they follow the janazah, everyone's engaging in worldly talk. So to give them something to say, there's nothing to say like Subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar, right? The baqiyat al-salihat, right? It's just to facilitate people. You tell them something to do, they'll do it. Right? That's one of the things that you see the mashayikh doing. Like while you give them, you understanding, etc. One of the best understanding is tell them to do something, right? And tell them you can pick whatever, right? Frankly, tell them to say Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, Subhanallah al-Azim, right? Or to say La ilaha illallah, Wallahu Akbar, whatever, right? It's better than engaging in worldly talk, right? وَكَفَنُ الضَّرُورَةِ مَا يُوجَدْ. And the kafan of necessity is whatever is found, right? Right? And it's related, and the hadith is in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad and others, that Sayyidina Hamza, right? Hamza the Asadullahi wa Asadu Rasulihi. Right? Sayyidina Hamza was buried in what? In one piece of cloth. Radiallahu ta'ala anhu, right? And we know the story of Sayyidina Mus'ab ibn Umair, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was the young man who was mudallal, who was spoilt, right? Who dressed in the best of clothing and so on. Right? Nothing was found to shroud him when he was martyred. لم يوجد له شيء. Right? And they only found one piece of cloth that was not long enough to fully shroud him. So if his head was covered, his feet would stick out. So they covered his head, and they took grass, like straw, to cover his feet with. Right? 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 And رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه. One of Imam Zayd's favorite verses. Right? رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله. Accomplished ones who were true to the covenant they made with their Lord. Right? Then how does the verse continue? فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَضَى نَحْبَهُ. And there are those who have fulfilled their part. وَمِنْهُمْ. And there's others who remain waiting. وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. They did not change whatsoever in their resolve to completely fulfill what they've pledged their covenant. It's not just about becoming martyred, it's that they died upholding their covenants with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's others who will wait till their last breath. وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. But they did not change from their resolve in one bit. As the poet said, right? وَلَوْ وَضَعُوا قَلْبِي عَلَى جَمْرَةِ الْغَضَى لَمَا مَاتَ فِي الْأَنَامِ لِغَيْرِكُمْ. That were they to place my heart on burning coals, في جمرة الغضا, the most intensely burning coals, لما مال في الأكوان لغيركم. It would never incline in creation to other than you. Right? Right? It says, لأنت في الأكوان مرمى مرامي. In all of creation, I have no desire but you. فواصل أو اهجر ما تشاء فأجره. So make me reach you. Right? Grant me union. فواصل أو اهجر, or desert me. ما تشاء فأجره. What you wish, do to me. فإن نلت ملك القربى كان هو المنى. If I attain closeness to you, then that was my desire. وإن ذقت طعم البعد فزت بأجره. And if I taste the bitterness of distance, I will succeed with its reward. Because I had the intention. I think that's from Diwan of Shaykh Abdul Rahman, right? Of course, I'm probably misquoting it fully, but I think that he was merciful, he'll forgive. Right? So, كفن الضرورة ما وجد. Then he tells us about الصلاة على الميت. الصلاة على الميت, and we'll read that. Any questions here before we continue? Okay. Fred, could you put some cold water in this? Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about the permissibility of a woman to wash her husband during her Idah period. Does that permissibility of touch and sight continue even if the husband hasn't passed away? For example, if they were to be divorced?
Okay, that's way outside the scope here. Like, what are the ahkam al-iddah that comes in the rulings of iddah? Because it's complicated. Depends on which kind of iddah it is, etc. And there's implications to that, right? So certain types of interaction are considered raj'a, because the talaq, right? Divorce can be raj'i or ba'in. It can be revocable or irrevocable. And then there's things that, if they take place, would constitute a revocation of the talaq. So they say if the divorce was only due to argument, etc., then it's sunnah for the woman to dress up nicely, especially if she's hopeful. No, in the other one, like with the tea. Just bring right? So there's difference, because the revocable divorce, if certain types of you threw it. Okay, Bismillah. So that's outside the scope of the class. Is it related to the text?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, something you mentioned before we were reading about the makruh for the family to prepare a meal for visitors. So is that like the expectation for the family to prepare a meal?
No, just doing it in general. Because al-ma'ruf urfan kal-mashrut shartan. Right? Something is customarily known, it's as if specified. So there's certain social norms that may be widespread, but so no one has to expect. Like, let's say Si Rafe doesn't have to tell that, okay, I'm coming to visit you for to pay condolences, you have to feed me. No one says that. But social expectations, right? The urf, right? Social expectations, right? The urf can be, in a binary way, it could be hasan or ghair hasan. It could be good or not. Right? And the urf can take all 5 rulings of the sharia. There's permissible custom, there's praiseworthy custom, there's disliked custom. There's custom that's obligatory. It's unusual, but there's custom that's obligatory to uphold. Right? So let's say in the coffee bean industry, all payments are made, all deferred payments are made a week from purchase. Let's say it's a custom it's a known custom. So some young entrepreneur buys a whole bunch of beans, says, I'll pay later. It's customarily known that deferred payment is a week. So al-ma'ruf urfan kal-mashrut shartan. That which is customarily known as if it's legally specified. So I didn't agree to when I'll pay. That's as if legally specified in the contract. So some custom is obligatory. Some other customs haram. When they're doing things that entail contravention of rulings of the sharia or contravention of meanings that must be preserved or must be avoided in the sharia. Right? So customs are of various kinds, right? The sharia takes custom into consideration, right? And we avoid unnecessarily rejecting custom, right? Right? But there are harmful customs, right? There are harmful customs, right? And it creates serious burden, especially many people have huge families. Someone dies, suddenly. Now, if siblings do it, etc., the most important is husband and wife, parent and child. Right? This is, for siblings to do it, there's more leeway, right? The siblings step in, the uncles and aunts step in, your cousins, your nephews, etc., right? Friends, right? But especially spouses, children, parents, that's the immediate family. Even siblings, there's more leeway. There's more leeway. Because generally, adult siblings don't generally live together. So there's more leeway. There's not, the sibling of the deceased, right? 'Cause they don't directly, they're not a direct inheritor. The normal case, right? So, anyways.
The recitation of the Quran, paying for it, is that if it's contractually done or if...
No, but the same thing applies, right? Al-ma'ruf urfan kal-mashhud shartan. Something contractually known, customarily known, is as if legally specified. So, that's why the Indian ulama, at least in theory, are extremely strict about the matter of paying for people to lead Taraweeh. Because there's no need. But then that's a more tricky thing, because leading Taraweeh is not the mere recitation of Quran, right? Right? It's like imama. You're bringing someone to lead prayer in a specific way. There's more leeway in that. But even then, the better thing for communities to have their own huffaz.
Then I get to know that gifts might be given or food might be
Yeah.
given.
So those things. But the contrary thing is, but even in that, for Taraweeh, etc., very often what happens is, I've had to mediate in some of these cases. Someone comes, they took a month off work, so they weren't getting paid, and the way our community is, someone goes to lead somewhere and say, "Okay, well, we're not going to pay you rent. We're not going to pay you your salary because you left us for a month." And they come somewhere else and they gave them $250 for the month. Now they can't pay their own rent and so on. So in that sense, practically, so this is the theory, the specific applications. So imama for Taraweeh is different. The superior thing, every community should have more than enough hufaz to cover their hifz needs. That's superior, right? And to do so with good, sound, proper recitation, right? But there are considerations, right? And especially when bring someone from overseas for other reasons too. Husn al-qira'ah, experience, etc. There's secondary benefits. Right? People gain experience by going to different communities. Right? So anyways, we'll read فصل في الصلاة على الميت. He says الصلاة عليه فرض كفاية. Prayer upon the deceased is a communal obligation. Right? So at least some people have to perform it. Right? And the furud al-kifaya are very important, that they should be good procedures for taking care of it. Again, in masajid, we should be following standards and procedures. So there's a janazah, and the masjid should have its policies. Who leads the janazah? Right? Especially because it's a matter where there's difference of opinion. The Hanafis and the Shafi'is differ. Right? So the deceased wanted someone to lead, and the masjid says, the imam, these things should be agreed beforehand. Right? Should be agreed beforehand. Right? And all these things, and people themselves should take these things seriously. If you agree with the masjid to have the thing, you should agree to your terms. And my sister was really mad at a friend of hers because they had, her friend got married at a particular mosque, and the imam of the masjid said some really outrageous things. So, we believe, as Muslims, because a lot of non-Muslims there, we believe that the woman's permission is needed for marriage. Even if it means sending a few big guys to hover over her for 2 or 3 hours until she says yes. That's also consent. Does anything in our deen say that coercion is consent? No. Any good cultural norms that are accepted, that's how you seek the woman's consent? Right? Now, but the fault is the people. Like, you had the choice of who would do the nikah and these things, you know, you need to take care of beforehand, right? Likewise with the janazah. So the people conducting janazah, they should clarify, especially if they had particular expectation. They should take care of making sure. So let's say someone passed away in Sister Zubayda's family. She's the religious person who's taking care. To make sure, okay, who's going to lead the prayer, etc., and to get these things in writing. But on the other side, the masjid should have policies and agree to these things in writing. Right? That's much better to have a form, etc., who will be leading the prayer. I've been stuck in a situation, I don't do a lot of these. When I came to Canada, Shaykh Zahir, I was like, man, I feel like I'm like, it was some reference to some the Undertaker. Like, what? I said, why? So I go around left and across town every day, every other day, conducting people's janazas. Like, what am I? Like, why do you say yes? So who's going to do it? I said, like, they're going to leave the body unburied? Just don't do it. See, you're a heartless man. It was like, I said, no. So yeah, because, but sometimes you go somewhere, and they, like I had to, in our own families. So the family is asking that I lead. But within the family, other people are saying, no, we want so-and-so to lead. And the masjid saying, someone else to lead. So I just went to renew my wudu, right? Because like, what else do you do? I actually didn't have to go that far. They let the imam lead. I'm not that. Like, if they want me to lead, I'll lead. But I have no vested interest in leading. So that this is one of the things that fard kifaya, that we need to take care of it. It's a fard. The non-fulfillment of a fard is far more grave than non-fulfillment of sunnahs or recommended matters. Right? And these things, we should fulfill them with excellence. Fulfill them with excellence. And part of seeking knowledge is to learn how to fulfill our personal responsibilities excellent, but there are social responsibilities that need fulfilling with excellence. And there's certain core responsibilities. Right? If you want to be involved in the masjid, right? The masjid is a place of devotion. If we take care of the devotional aspects with excellence, people come to the janazah, it's run really well. They come to the 5 prayers, they run really well. Right? Then it doesn't matter if you don't have gymnastics, and 2 masjids in the GTA have saunas planned. One because they got funding from the Ontario government for it. The other because the other one had it. The first one of these you can understand. The second, it's just totally absurd. Right? But these core things, right? It's it's an opportunity because there's a lot of khair that can be done through this. And successful communities say likewise nikahs at masjids to facilitate some of these things, to get involved. These are to make it a beautiful experience. So one masjid, they're still arguing between themselves about a nikah that I want to conduct. But where the men and women should have sat. Some people from the board came and apologized to me. Others said, I will not apologize. I was like, I didn't want anybody's apology. Right? Same masjid, they're still in disagreement as to whether I should give the khutbah or shouldn't. Like, if you want me to, okay. If you don't, okay. But every time I go there, it's like, I'm sorry you're not giving the khutbah. Okay. When are you giving the khutbah? Please give the khutbah. Others sort of just give me the dirty look like, well, why? What are you doing here? It's a masjid. I'm welcome. Right? So these things we need to take care of, the furud al-kifaya. Arkanuha at-takbirat wal-qiyam. The integrals of the prayer are standing and the takbirs, 4 takbirs. That's it. Said Allahu Akbar, and just stay quiet. You've done your duty. شرائطها ستة. Its conditions are إسلام الميت وطهارته, the Islam of the deceased and their purity. Right? So they need to be washed. If washing is not possible, then tayammum. وتقدمه, for the deceased to be in front. وحضوره, and for them to be present. So salat al-ghaib in our madhab is not valid. It's not valid. There's difference of opinion though. In the Shafi'i school, the fact that the Prophet ﷺ did it for Najashi means it's sunnah. We said the sunnah is a habit of the Prophet ﷺ. Sahaba died all over the place. When did the Prophet ﷺ do Salat al-Janazah for them? When they were not present. So the exception is kept exceptional. And we investigate further to understand how it fits. And the Prophet ﷺ could see the Najashi. So that is either from the khasa'is of the Prophet ﷺ when he was effectively present. Right? And it was also done to showcase his Islam. Because the Sahaba didn't know that he was Muslim, and to honor him. But in these practical things, if Salat al-Janazah is being done, right, there's no way you can condemn it. Right? Because being Hanafi is not a sect. It's one school of understanding. Right? Now, when I used to be an intense Hanafi, I would raise my hand without saying Allahu Akbar. So I'd make dua for the deceased. Because in Jordan they'd be praying, because Palestine's next door, every once in a while, another busload of Palestinians would get slaughtered and killed and bombed upon and so on. So they'd do Salat al-Janazah, al-Ghaib. So I'd raise my hand, tie it, and just make the dua. Yes, subhanakallah, hamdik, etc. Make the dua. Would not say the takbir. But if you want to join in, we'll see that. So حضوره, it's one of the shurut of sihha. أو حضور أكثر بدنه. So either the presence of the deceased or most of their body. أو نصفه مع رأسه, or half of them with their head. Well, and then you can read the fiqh of what if only the head is there, or what about the chest, etc. وكون المصلي عليه غير راكب بلا عذر. And the people praying upon the deceased cannot be riding without excuse. Right? Because لمخالفة هيئة السنة. Because this is, like the default is that you stand. You cannot. It's a fard prayer, so it shares some of the meanings of a fard prayer. You can't pray the fard riding unless there's a genuine excuse. وَكَوْنُ الْمَيِّتْ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ, and for the deceased to be on the ground. Right? Yeah, on the ground or to something connected to the ground. Right? So, such as, like whatever the deceased are brought in, it's connected to the ground. Meaning you can't hang them from the roof. Right? You can't have them on an animal, etc. Right? فإن كان على الدابة أو على أيدي الناس لم تجوز الصلاة. But if they are on an animal or people are holding them while this janazah is being performed, so so Brother Bilal wanted a spectacular janazah, so he hired some non-Muslim servants who would hold him high while they're praying over him. It doesn't work. Right? على المختار, according to the chosen position. إلا من عذر, unless there's a genuine excuse. And then the sunnahs وسننها أربع. قيام الإمام حذاء الميت. The sunnahs are four. One is for the imam to stand facing the deceased. ذكرا كان أو أنثى, whether male or female. Right? حذاء الميت. Right? And facing, in line with the deceased at the level of their chest. Right? At the level of their chest. Of course, the deceased is facing which way? The Qibla. Right? So one stands where the chest area would be from behind them, of course, because they're facing the Qibla. Right? وَالثَّنَاء بَعْدَ التَّكْبِيرَةِ الْأُولَى. And one says the thana after the first takbir. The thana, subhanakallahumma bihamdik. And this is the relied upon position in the Hanafi school. The transmitted position is one gives the thana after the first takbir. Right? And Imam al-Shrumbulali chose, many of the later scholars chose that the Fatiha is permitted with the intention of praise. But the relied upon position is that one recites the thana. That's the madhab position. Right? But some of the later scholars did take the position of the permissibility of reciting the Fatiha. It's a matter where there's difference with the Shafi'is as well, so there's some leeway in it. The third is as-salatu ala Sayyidina Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ba'da al-thaniya. After the second takbir, salah on the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the best way of doing so is the salat al-Ibrahimiyya. It's also, this is the order of how you make dua. You begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you send blessings on the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and these are mafatihul qabul, the keys to acceptance. They say, husn al-taqdeem min husn al-talab. The good introduction is from the good asking. Right? So that's the thaniya. Right? والدعاء للميت بعد الثالثة. Right? والدعاء للميت بعد الثالثة. Dua for the deceased after the third takbir. ولا يتعين له شيء. There's nothing that is specifically sunnah. Meaning, so it's sunnah muakkada to make dua after the third takbir. Nothing is specifically sunnah, meaning that if you recited something else, you're not leaving the sunnah. The sunnah is to make dua for the deceased. If you didn't make dua for the deceased there, you kind of skip the point of the salat al-janazah. Right? But, right? وَإِن دَعَى بِالْمَأْثُورِ فَهُوَ أَحْسَنُ وَأَبْلَغُ. But if one makes dua with the transmitted dua, it is better and more emphatic. Right? وَمِنْهُ مَا حَفِظَ عَوْفٌ مِنْ دُعَاءِ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Right? So what Sayyidina Auf remembered from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Auf ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu, right? And he prayed behind the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam make this dua, and then he said at the end, فَتَمَنَّيْتُ أَنْ أَكُونَ أَنَا الْمَيِّتِ. I wished after such a dua from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I wish I was the person who died. Right? So you could get, because you get that kind of dua from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's like a pretty serious stamp, right? So the dua is, Allahumma khfir lahu warhamhu wa'afihi wa'fu anhu. Allah, forgive them and have mercy on them. Wa'afihi, and free them of harm. Wa'fu anhu, and overlook them. Wa'akrim nuzlahu, honor their descent into their grave. Wawassi' madkhalahu, and fasten their entry point into the grave. Waghsilhu bil ma'i wal thalji wal barad, and wash them with water and snow and hail. وَنَقِّهِ مِنَ الْخَطَايَا, and purify them from all errors. كَمَا يُنَقَّ الثَّوْبُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الدَّنَسِ, as a white garment is cleansed from dirt. وَأَبْدِلْهُ دَارًا خَيْرًا مِنْ دَارِهِ, and replace them with an abode better than their abode. وَأَهْلًا خَيْرًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ, and a family better than their family. Of course, some women get jealous about this. So you're saying that, who will she, I've been asked actually, who will he be in the grave? Don't worry, if you're the good spouse, right? And they say khayran min ahlihi, is that, from that is that your own spouse will be better in the hereafter than they'll be in this life. Right? Likewise, Hurul Ain, it's just good to know there's multiple, at least 4 major interpretations of Hurul Ain. One of them, it is the wives of the believers, in this life, they'll be in the most beautiful form in the hereafter. Okay? The other is that it refers to both the wives plus the paradisical maidens. And the other is just the paradisical maidens. Right? And there's other weaker opinions, which none of the opinions are to do with the big white almonds. So there's some German who argued there's the big white almonds that got nothing to do with it. Right? I think got the spelling wrong or something. Okay? So sometimes it's good to know these other opinions. People get really caught up. Said, well, Ibn Abbas held that the Hur al-Ain describe the wives and how they will be in paradise. Someone's caught up on something, like when they get there, that's fine. But sometimes you have to give people something that consoles them, right? Allah. Okay. وَابْدِلْهُ دَارًا خَيْرًا مِنْ دَارِهِ وَأَهْلًا خَيْرًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ وَزَوْجًا خَيْرًا مِنْ زَوْجِهِ. And a spouse better than their spouse. It would be the same spouse, better than. It doesn't say, that's not necessarily in the grave too. That meaning in the hereafter, right? وَأَدْخِلْهُ الْجَنَّةِ, and make them enter paradise. وَأَعِذْهُ مِنْ عَذَابِ الْقَبْرِ وَعَذَابِ النَّارِ, and shield them from the punishment of the grave and the punishment of the fire. وَيُسَلِّمُ بَعْدَ الرَّابِعَةِ مِنْ غَيْرِ دُعَاء, and one gives salam after the fourth without dua. في ظاهر الرواية, according to ظاهر الرواية, meaning that there's no specific sunnah that is clearly established to say after 4 rak'ahs. But if one makes a brief dua there, Allahumma la tahrimna ajrah wa la taftinna ba'dah, there's no harm in saying that. And he mentions that in the right. ولا يرفع يديه في التكبيرة في غير التكبيرة الأولى. One only raises one's hands once. The Eids, you celebrate, so you raise your hands. The funeral is about death, so you're still. I used to get really confused. I still do, actually. وَلَوْ كَبَّرَ الْإِمَامُ خَمْسًا لَمْ يُتَّبَعْ. If the Imam gives takbir 5 times, they're not followed. لكن ينتظر سلامة. One waits for their salam. وَلَا يُسْتَغْفَرْ لِمَجْنُونٍ وَصَبِي. One does not seek forgiveness for someone who was, who had continual insanity. Because the pen is lifted from. They're from the people of paradise. وَالصَّبِي. If a child dies, they're of the people of paradise. There's no forgiveness needed for them. ويقول اللهم اجعله لنا فرطا. Allah, make them pure reward for us. وَجَعَلْهُ لَنَا ذُخْرًا أَجْرًا وَذُخْرًا. Make them reward and treasure for us. Right? وَجَعَلْهُ لَنَا شَافِعًا مُشَفِّعًا. And make them an intercessor who actively intercedes for us. So, and then we'll look at who leads, has the right to lead, etc. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وحزبه والحمد لله رب العالمين.